Björn, are you still here? Can you still hear us?
Yes.
Perfect.
I think I don't get the video. Let's allow.
Okay. Yes.
No.
Very briefly, we could see you.
Yeah.
Okay, there you are. Björn,
I'll just adjust it a little.
Do you want me to fill you in on what happened? Because there were two other people who we interviewed before you. One is from Peru. I mean, he's German, but he and his family most of the time live in Peru. And the last person we spoke to gave us an insider's view of the situation in Russia. Very briefly, Björn.
I just looked at them. But I'm not too proficient in German, but I understand most of it anyway.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Very good. Now, please tell us who you are, Björn, because you and I know each other because we've both been on 2 interviews with Ulf Bittner in Sweden.
Yeah. I'm an old pediatrician. And started with biochemistry before medical studies. So I got a PhD in biochemistry, working with the measles virus RNA and nucleocapsid. That I've been a lab rat for about 8 years. And then studied medicine and became a pediatrician, and has been working as that for 32 years, it turned out. And then I have become assistant professor in pediatrics at Strömstad Academy. And also I've been working 2 years as a postdoc in the US with HIV envelope protein. So there are 2 more years of lab rat. Okay.
Let me quickly translate. Also Björn Hammarskjöld ist einer der bekanntesten Wissenschaftler in Schweden. Ich war zweimal mit ihm in Interviews mit unserem Freund Ulf Bittner. Und er ist Kinderarzt seit 30 Jahren, ist aber außerdem, so bezeichnet er sich selbst, eine Art Laborratte. Da ist sein Feld die Biochemie, hat Zeit in den USA verbracht, im Zusammenhang auch mit der HIV-Forschung. Und jetzt wird er uns was über die Lage in Schweden erzählen, die Zahlen. Ich habe einiges davon schon vorher in einem Interview besprochen, aber ich glaube, er hat hier wirklich Interessantes zu berichten. Okay, go ahead, Björn.
Yeah. What I would like to talk about is how many people have really been infected with HIV? And
HIV or Corona?
No, sorry, coronavirus.
Okay.
I'm just sorry. But also what happens during a lockdown and some other things. If I could have the first picture, please. This is the mortality and the PCR positive in Sweden from January 1st, 2020 till 2 days ago. And on the left side is daily death, which is average during 7 days, and also the number of positive PCR tests are also average for 7 days. Otherwise, it gets so really bumpy curve. So we had quite a few deaths in April, late March and start in April. Then it's tapered off till the start of the summer. Really was low in mortality until September, then is raised until Christmas approximately. And after that is just plummeted. And on the right side, you see how many positive PCR tests there are. And in the beginning, they didn't take very many. They didn't have enough supply, and there wasn't too many people either in the population that have COVID-19. And then they started mass testing, and after August, they started testing 250,000 people per week in Sweden. We have just 10.3 million inhabitants. So you see, there is a peak ahead of the death numbers. And also, when you go down to middle of January, it just is tapering off as at a lower speed. So if we could take the next slide. There you see a horizontal line at the right. That must be the level of false positive PCR tests, as the mortality is lagging behind the PCR tests until beginning of February. So this must be the level of false positive as far as I can see. So it's interesting, and I think we're not getting any third wave. And that is because if you look at the number 3 slide, so I've just collected some data from Johns Hopkins website about COVID-19. And there you see, when I take the population in ascending numbers, Princess Diamond was a cruise ship in Japan, 3,618 of the population, and 696 were PCR positive. That's 19.2% that were positive. What happened to the other 80%? They never got the COVID-19. 14 deaths, so it's just 0.39% of the population that died. That's not very much. If you look at the hangar ship, USS Theodore Roosevelt, 5,000 population, 1,100, almost 1,200 PCR positive, 23% were positive of the population. So we're never getting above 25% in a population when we get infected. So what happens now? In Sweden, 10.3 million inhabitants. Last figure I have is 588,000 persons testing positive. That's 5.7% of the Swedish population. We have about 20% left to go to immunity, in the herd immunity. And we have had 12,115 deaths. That's 0.12% of the population. If we look at the Spanish flu, Sweden had over 37% died in Spanish flu.
37%?
No, 37,000 people. And that meant about 1% of the population. So the COVID-19 has about 1/10 of the population of the death.
Yeah.
If we compare it to 1918. We have had not have had very much of a lockdown, but there are some of the human rights that we can't use, and that is really bad. And we're locking up our elderly in the elderly homes, which I see as torture. Why can't people, relatives, go to a person living in a room which is their own rented room at a home? If they're dying, you can't go there as a relative. I think it's awful.
Björn, let me translate, so that you can then continue. Also die ersten Slides, die wir gesehen haben, haben, um es mal ganz kurz zusammenzufassen, indiziert, dass wir offenbar auch in Schweden eine PCR-Test-Pandemie haben und eine nicht ganz kleine Menge an False Positives. Dieses dritte Slide, an dem zeigt er uns, dass wenn man sich die Population jeweils aus bestimmten Gebieten oder bestimmten überschaubaren Größen wie hier 2 Schiffen zum Beispiel anguckt. Das erste ist ein Cruise Ship, das zweite ist ein Aircraft Carrier, wie heißt das, Flugzeugträger, Theodore Roosevelt. Und in beiden Fällen war es so, dass zwar eine Reihe von Positiven durch die PCR-Tests entdeckt wurden, aber unterm Strich dann am Ende die Leute, die gestorben sind, weit hinter dem zurückblieben, was man zum Beispiel in der spanischen Grippe gesehen hat. Die Prozentzahlen sind da ganz rechts zu sehen. Die Prozentzahl der Verstorbenen in Schweden an Covid sind 0,12%. Auf dem Flugzeugträger sind es 0,02% der Population, der rund 5000 Leute, die da waren, Soldaten, verstorben. Auf dem Cruise Ship sind es 0,39%. Da sagt er, vor diesem Hintergrund haben wir zwar Glück in Schweden, weil es den echten Lockdown nicht gab, aber er sagt, einige der Freiheitsrechte sind eingeschränkt worden und er sieht das zum Beispiel als Folter an, dass alte Menschen in Altersheimen nicht besucht werden können. Also diese Regel gilt auch da. So yeah, you consider that torture, and I think a lot of people will agree with that, unless there is a justification for this, but there isn't. Not from these figures, at least.
No, there is no justification at all. And just restricting people gathering in all places is just stupidity. Because they have been looking at the infectious rate and found that when you're out in the city walking around and things like that, what happens? You don't get infected. Not even on public transport. You get infected at home. That's the largest source of infection, and working places as second. But you can gather as much as you like on open spaces, in shops and everything. People still avoid seeing each other, and that social distancing that they recommend, I feel it's really, really bad. It shouldn't be social distancing, it should be physical distance. And that is enough with 1 meter if you're face to face to each other. Because as I live in a country where we have minus 30 degrees from time to time, you see how long, how far your breath is going forward in front of your mouth. It's less than half a meter. If you're standing next to a person side by side, the breath are never crossing each other. You can't get infected if you're standing side by side. And if you're behind someone with her back in front of you, you can't infect and you can't be infected by the other person. So this is just ridiculous to keep us away from each other. And that is also something I don't like at all. Mm-hmm. We can have as big, if it's 50, 500, 5,000 or 50,000 people gathered in an athletic stadium, how many are sitting facing each other on less than 1 meter apart? Which means it doesn't, we don't transfer any coronavirus by going to watch football or soccer or ice hockey. So I think it's just stupid rules. The thing you should do is to wash your hands before you suck your thumb or peek your nose or point into your eye. That's enough. You don't need anything more. So that's just ordinary common sense and also scientific knowledge since years. And then the politicians misinterpret the studies and things like that, so they start locking down. And if we go back to the picture again, what happens in the United Kingdom? They have a really strict lockdown and their figures are increasing. Russia hasn't had too much lockdown. And you see at the mortality rates, they are not very much. India is an interesting thing. There, they say, let's just have to go down to check here. They have a mortality rate of 0.011%. And Indian drug regulators have denied the emergency use authorization to Pfizer's vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine, on the ground of that causality of its reported adverse events were being probed, and the company had not presented any plan to generate safe and immunogenicity data. So, but also,
Björn, it's not 0.11, it's 0.01%. It's even less.
No, 0.011.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 0.011.
Yes. Okay, I get it.
Yeah. So this is, and India is a country close to the equator, which means they have more sun than we have back in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And vitamin D level is really necessary for us to have. If you have a vitamin D level above the physiology lower limit is 125 nanomoles per liter. Then you don't get COVID-19.
Let me translate this.
Yep.
Also, nachdem er gesagt hat, diese Isolierung der Alten ist aus seiner Sicht Folter, wo wir eigentlich alle mit übereinstimmen, hat er sich jetzt nochmal um die weiteren Einschränkungen gekümmert und dazu seinen Kommentar abgegeben, aber auch seine Einschätzung abgegeben, und zwar die Restriktionen des öffentlichen Lebens. Er sagt, es ist völlig problemlos aus seiner Sicht, wenn sich die Menschen öffentlich treffen, die stecken sich nicht da an. Hier wird zwar auch, haben wir, glaube ich, vorhin anklingen gehört, von Leuten, die allerdings keine Quellen dafür geben und überhaupt keine wissenschaftliche Einschätzung dafür angeben, behauptet, dass die Demonstrationen zum Ansteigen von Infektionen geführt hat, aber das ist eben nur eine Behauptung, das dürfte die übliche Propaganda sein. Er sagt, aus medizinischer Sicht ist das Quatsch, diese öffentlichen Versammlungen führen nicht zu Infektionen, man infiziert sich eher zu Hause. Die Frage ist, was kann man dann machen? Und er sagt, die alten bekannten Methoden sollte man benutzen, sich die Hände waschen, bevor man sich ins Gesicht fasst oder in die Augen fasst, und physischen Abstand halten. Da meint er aber, da reicht 1 Meter aus, weil das würde man in Schweden besonders gut sehen können. Da hat man ja mitunter minus 30 Grad, da sieht man, wie weit der Atem reicht, und da reicht nur einen halben Meter. Wenn man also voreinander steht, dann reicht 1 Meter Abstand aus. Man wird sich damit nicht anstecken können. Dann hat er geguckt, wie sieht das denn in den anderen Ländern aus, hier in dieser Grafik, hat festgestellt, obwohl in England ein sehr strenger Lockdown herrschte, sind die Zahlen hochgegangen. So, das passt zu dem, was wir eben aus Peru und was wir eben aus Russland gehört haben. Der Lockdown hat überhaupt keinen Einfluss auf irgendwas. Hat dann weiter geguckt, was ist denn überhaupt in Indien los? Und Indien ist ja, hat mit die größte Bevölkerung, ist aber auch, er sagt, nah am Äquator, also insgesamt ist es da sehr warm, das heißt, da gibt es eine Menge Sonne, das heißt, da gibt es eine Menge Vitamin D. Dieses Vitamin D-Problem, was man beispielsweise in Schweden hat, hat man in Indien nicht. Und das spiegelt sich wieder in den Zahlen. Da gibt es nur eine Todesrate, bezogen auf Corona oder was immer es ist, im Verhältnis zur Gesamtbevölkerung von 0,011%. Das ist nichts. Und kein Lockdown. As far as you know, Björn, there's no lockdowns in India, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting what you said about this, like standing close to one another, because like usually, I mean, there's also some sort of like politeness distance that you have to another person, like sort of normally anyway, because I mean, to cross this kind of distance of like 1 meter or like 80 centimeters or like approximately between one another, you need to have some sort of really close relationship. Like if you go frontal, you know, this distance, then you would need to be really close to that person. And so I think it's in general kind of unrealistic that you have to, you know, that you have to kind of force people to stand further, just what you said, you know, like from one another, then what would be their usual normal distance if you don't know someone anyway. And I mean, with the people in your house, obviously, you know, if you hug your children, you're close anyway, and that's not going to be possible to kind of keep that distance. So I think it's quite convincing that you say it usually happens maybe in the family home or something, that people get infected. And yeah, just wanted to add that.
So the bottom line is, you're saying keeping older people isolated is torture because there's no justification for it, no scientific, no medical justification, and it is stupid to ban public gatherings, to ban football or soccer games, because that's not where people get infected. They do get infected in their homes.
Right. And if you look at the vitamin D level, newborn children are authorized to have 400 international units of vitamin D per day. A newborn weighs about 3 kilos. Then the authorities tell us that an adult should have 400 EU IU as well. If I would prescribe antibiotics to an adult that would get a newborn child's dose, it wouldn't be good. If we take those 400 units per day to a newborn, divide by 3 and multiply by 75, I just get 10,000 IU per day of vitamin D3 to an adult. So it's important that we really have enough vitamin D. And in Sweden, it's 99% that are deficient in vitamin D level if we put the level at 125 nanomoles per liter. Why I have chosen 125, as the labs are stating 75 as the lowest, at least 75 as an optimum level of vitamin D, is that a lactating woman will not give any vitamin D via the breast milk to the baby. And that is what our authorities know. Otherwise, they would not give newborn babies 400 units of vitamin D per day. And also, when we then look at parathyroid hormone, which regulates the bone forming in the body. If we have a vitamin D deficiency, the PTH is elevated. And when you measure the PTH, when you increase the vitamin D level, the PTH goes down, but just to one specific level, 4. And even if you get much higher vitamin D level, the PTH level will not go down further. So that's a second physiological level. And also those people having herds of cattle in Africa, they also never have below 125 nanomoles of, per liter of vitamin D. So that's our 3 levels, physiological levels of vitamin D that we should apply. We should not apply those 75 nanomoles. And then it's just suboptimal between 50 and 75. This deficiency in all 3 cases. So we have to have at least 5,000 IU per day to keep our level of vitamin D above 125 nanomoles per liter. And where I live in the southern part of Sweden, it's called middle part, but Norrland is really huge, so it doesn't matter. Between March 22 and September 20, the sun is above the horizon more than 30 degrees, which may give me vitamin D by the sun. The rest of the winter half year, the sun is below 30 degrees. When I lived in Mora, about 300 kilometers northwest of where I live now, the sun rose on 20th of December, 7 degrees above the horizon. So it's not very much. And that is because the UVB rays will not penetrate the atmosphere if the sun is below 30 degrees elevation.
So what you're saying is that there's a direct correlation between the level of vitamin D that people have and the chances that they have of getting sick with a corona or the flu or cold.
Yes. And that is easily shown. Just look at any child below the age of 1. Then they weigh usually around the 1-year-old weigh about 10 kilos. So they are never having any colds during the first year. But then when they are reaching the age of 1 and 10 kilos, then you're below the right amount of vitamin D per day. So the vitamin D levels are depleted, and the kids get all the infections in preschool. It's interesting, in Finland, during 1950s and up to 1964, they gave newborn babies just 5,000 units per day. That means 125,000 units to an adult. And they didn't have any problems with that level. The problem appeared when they decreased the level stepwise until 1990s, when they got down to 400 units again. And that means that the diabetes type 1 has soared in Finland compared to the 50s.
Björn, why is that? Why did they drop the level of? Why did they not give enough vitamin D?
Because of international cooperation. That's the only reason. So we have Nordic food recommendations, and that includes Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. And they have all agreed to have just 400 units of vitamin D per day.
Why?
As all other countries.
Why?
I don't know why. I don't know why. They just agreed. And those Nordic nutrition recommendations, they are based on a lot of not very good research. So they never read papers that is against the Nordic nutrition recommendations. So you should have
Isn't it very obvious that if you look at India and at those figures in India where they have no vitamin D deficiency and they have almost no cases, no problems with corona. On the other hand, in those countries where, like in Sweden, probably same here in Germany, where 99% of the population have a vitamin D deficiency, we do have some problems. Not as serious as the mainstream media try to make them, but we do have some problems. Isn't it very obvious that vitamin D plays a big role in this?
It would be, but WHO doesn't read vitamin D papers.
Mm-hmm.
And the authorities in Sweden doesn't read vitamin D papers. There was an article or two articles in Läkartidningen, the Swedish journal of doctors. And in April, where one doctor proposed to use high dose of vitamin C, and another article in beginning of May, where 3 doctors proposed to use high levels of vitamin D. Haven't seen one single hospital using vitamin D or C.
Mm-hmm. Björn, let me translate this. Also er legt großen Wert darauf, dass offenbar Vitamin D eine große Rolle spielt bei der Behandlung oder Vorbeugung gegen offenbar alle respiratorischen Erkrankungen, jedenfalls auch Corona, denn nochmal, in Indien gibt es praktisch gar kein Problem damit. 0,011% der Bevölkerung sind an Corona gestorben. Dort gibt es aber auch eben kein Vitamin-D-Problem, sondern das gibt es nur in den nordischen Ländern. Er hat beschrieben, dass die Sonne in Schweden beispielsweise in weiten Teilen während des Winters nicht über 30 Grad hochgeht. Über den Horizont am 20.12. bei 7 Grad, da kriegt man so gut wie gar kein Vitamin, da kriegt man kein Vitamin D. Und er hat beschrieben, dass die Gabe von Vitamin D in den nordischen Ländern, ein Beispiel hat er Finnland genannt, in den 1950ern ausreichend war. Ich glaube 5000 Units pro Baby. Und da gab es dann auch keine derartigen Probleme mehr. Dann haben sich die nordischen Länder, und zwar in einer internationalen Kooperation, das waren Finnland, Dänemark, Norwegen, Schweden und Island, zusammengeschlossen und haben aus Gründen, die er auch nicht nachvollziehen kann, die Vitamin-D-Vergabe runtergeschraubt. Daraufhin stieg dann in Finnland zum Beispiel die Erkrankungsrate bei Diabetes Typ 2 an. Die Forschung... Die Forschung, die es in Type 1, I'm sorry, Type 1, ja. Typ 1 war das. Die Forschung, die es dazu gibt, zur Wirksamkeit von Vitamin D, wird offenbar von den nordischen Forschern, die sich hier zusammengeschlossen haben, gar nicht gelesen, und die WHO macht überhaupt nichts zu Vitamin D. The WHO only seems to be pushing vaccines, right?
Right. Nothing else.
Also das gibt sehr zu denken, das haben wir jetzt ein paar Mal gehört, dass es andere Behandlungsmöglichkeiten gibt, die sehr viel billiger sind, sehr viel wirksamer sind als das, was hier gemacht wird. Trotzdem werden diese anderen Behandlungsmöglichkeiten in den Medien immer runtergeschrieben bzw. nicht ernst genommen. Und das Einzige, was die WHO pusht, sind immer diese Vaccinations. Dabei muss man allerdings auch berücksichtigen, dass die WHO zu einem großen Teil abhängig ist durch die Geldspenden von Bill Gates, dem größten Impfstoffhersteller der Welt, weil er an all diesen Firmen beteiligt ist, wie ich gestern Abend noch mal in einem anderen Gespräch feststellen konnte. Okay.
I have a question, like when you now coming back to the Corona situation in Sweden. So if you compare the situation in the last, during the last peak and now this peak, is there, because there was, I read that, now there's the sort of the growth of death is relatively small. I think it was just like 60% or so that were added like in this second phase. And while in Germany, we have this kind of explosion or like seeming explosion of like new death cases. Like I think there was a comparison of like 60% raise, and here's like 300% or something, that when you compare, I think starting from July last year or so, when you compare these figures in the first wave and to the second wave now. And so it seems, I mean, is there something that Sweden does differently, or is it just like that herd immunity has become more prevalent, or what do you think as information at all?
As far as I can see from the first graph I showed, the death is about the same. The death volume is about the same, first and the second peak. But it's really going down faster, this second peak, than the first one. Probably because they are using cortisone in some cases and things like that. If you look at the total mortality in Sweden, during 2015 to 2019, we had about 92 deaths per year. And it varied between 88 and 94,000 deaths. And 2020, we're supposed to have had 98,000 deaths. But if we look back, you can take slide number 4. Here's the blue line is the total death curve in Sweden. If you look around 1993, there is a peak, which seems to be below the last one to the right, which is 2020. But in 1993, we just had 8.7 million inhabitants. So it's 83% mortality in 2020 compared to 1993. So it's not exceptional in no way. And there are several years in the 1990s and the beginning of 21st century that are above 2020's number if we compare it on the population basis.
Yeah, that's what most people don't seem to be doing. We have the same problem or a similar problem here in Germany because a lot of people, including scientists, who I know personally really well, are really impressed by excess mortality of around 50,000 this year. However, statisticians who have taken a closer look have found out that we don't have any excess mortality. Rather, we are below what would have been expected because in 1940 there was a very high birth rate and the people who were born in 1940 are now 80. And because of that, more people were expected to die this year than actually did. In that sense, it is not correct to say that we had excess mortality this year. Rather, we had, I think, roughly 7,000 fewer people died than what should have been expected. And same thing is true for Sweden. If you take into account that the population in 1993, I think that's the year you took, was lower at 8.7 million than it is today at 10 point something. Is it 10.6 million?
No, we have 10.3 million, 10.4 million inhabitants today.
Okay, das ist wichtig zu wissen, denn auch bei uns spielen die Zahlen natürlich eine Riesenrolle. Inzwischen versteht sogar der Normalbürger, dass irgendwas mit den Zahlen nicht stimmt. Aber er hat darauf hingewiesen, dass wenn wir uns diese Grafik angucken, die obere blaue Linie mit den Sterbefällen, dann sieht es so aus, als seien 1993 mehr Leute oder als sei da ein kleiner Spike gewesen in Mortality, aber noch mehr vielleicht in 2020. Er sagt, das ist aber nicht richtig, denn man muss in Betracht ziehen, dass in 1993 die Bevölkerung wesentlich geringer war als jetzt. Damals betrug sie 8,7 Millionen, jetzt beträgt sie 10,3 Millionen. Und ich habe gesagt, wir haben eine ähnliche Diskussion hier, wenn hier von auch Wissenschaftlern, einige, die ich gut kenne, die richtig wütend werden, wenn man sie darauf anspricht, die dann sagen, aber guck doch mal hier, wir haben 50.000, fast 50.000 Übersterblichkeit. Ja, auf den ersten Blick stimmt das, aber wenn man genauer hinguckt, dann stimmt es eben nicht, denn der 1940er Jahrgang bei uns in Deutschland war ein besonders geburtenstarker Jahrgang und deswegen waren wesentlich mehr Todesfälle zu erwarten. Tatsächlich, wenn man das in Betracht zieht, dann besteht hier sogar eine vergleichsweise Untersterblichkeit in Höhe von rund 7.000, meine ich. Also man muss mit den Zahlen sehr genau umgehen und sie ins Verhältnis setzen, sonst bekommt man immer falsche Informationen. Do you think this is being done on purpose, that in Sweden the numbers, the figures are misinterpreted, or is it out of stupidity?
Both. I think both.
Okay.
Yeah. So the problem, as I see it, is that if I in the years 2015 to 19 and deducted that from 2020. And then so it was different years, different. Each month had a different year as a maximum. So one year it was 2018, next year was 2015, and third year was 2019. And then I just added the numbers. About 3,700 too few people have died in 2020. So even if we just take the number of death in 2020 compared to the mean number of death in 2015 to 19, we get about 7,000 surplus death. So it's not very much. So it's like statistics. I also had some statistics at the university, so I can handle some of it at least. But as you know, there are lies, big lies, and statistics if you compare them. So if you misinterpret statistics, it's not very good.
Yeah.
Also, most fatalities have been in the 65 plus years. There are about 7,000 more deaths in the 65 plus age range compared to below 65. They haven't died in any excess at all. And also, I think it's there were 7 persons of the age of 90 plus that have been referred to an ICU, intensive care unit. All other age groups were in much bigger numbers of people referred to the ICU. Mm-hmm. So I think there is an age discrimination as well.
You're saying 7 people over the age of 90 were...
and there were just 2,000 of them that died in that age group.
Do people perform autopsies in Sweden to determine what the actual cause of death was? And if so, do you know anything about the actual cause of death in Sweden? Have the numbers been bloated, or have the real numbers been reported?
I think they said there is not recommended to make autopsies.
Same as here in Germany.
Yeah, and also there is one region in Sweden, Östergötland, where they have 245 deaths during the first half year of coronavirus. And then two senior doctors went to look at all the papers, and they found that 15% did not have any sign or PCR test that is positive for COVID-19. 70% died of something else but COVID-19.
Did you say
70%? 70% died of something else, but not corona. And 15% they said was due to corona.
Which means that 85% died of other causes.
Yes. But they're still counted as COVID-19 cases.
This is important. Let me translate this. Also ich habe gefragt, ob auch in Schweden genauere Zahlen bekannt sind darüber, an welchen Ursachen die Menschen tatsächlich gestorben sind, die als Covid-Tote geführt werden. Und er sagt, nee, es gibt welche, aber nur einzeln, denn auch da gab es die Anweisung, keine Autopsien, die Leute nicht zu obduzieren. Aber in Ostjütland haben zwei erfahrenere Ärzte trotzdem versucht herauszufinden, was los ist. Da waren 245 angebliche Covid-Toten während des ersten Halbjahrs der sogenannten Pandemie. Und diese beiden Ärzte haben herausgefunden, dass 85% der angeblichen Covid-Toten an völlig anderen Ursachen gestorben sind. Das entspricht in etwa dem, was wir aus anderen Ländern wissen. Das ist ein bisschen weniger. Wir wissen aus New York und Italien zum Beispiel, dass 97% an völlig anderen Ursachen als an Covid gestorben sind. 97% derjenigen, das haben uns ja die von uns angehörten Mediziner und Wissenschaftler bestätigt, 97% derjenigen, die angeblich an Covid gestorben sind.
Ja, Professor Fischel hatte ja ähnliche Erkenntnisse.
Yeah, you've heard of him, right? Professor Fischel, the professor of the University Hospital in Hamburg, he did perform autopsies, and he found that pretty much the same as you did in Sweden. He found that, I think even more than 85% of the people who were supposedly victims of COVID died of completely other causes.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear how the sort of scientific discussion in Sweden, or like the way that people deal with like critics of the actions of the government, how that is conducted, and is this? I mean, okay, there might be more people who say we want to go into like a harder lockdown since you don't have so much of a lockdown, but I mean, is there something going on in the sense of that it's an open discussion, that people have various opinions on it and they can freely talk about this on TV or somewhere else? Or is there also this kind of defamation going on that we see here, that everyone who has an opinion or like just wants to introduce a discussion about certain things is then immediately attacked by parts of the media?
The same in Sweden.
Oh, really? Do you have the same situation, or are there parts of the mainstream media that still report in an objective manner?
Well, they're supposed to report in an objective manner, but I think it's very selective reporting. And it seems like everyone who is not in the corridor of thoughts is just rejected. And we have a very narrow corridor of thoughts here. you can't say very much. Then you're, no, you can't say that. No, you can't say that either. You have to follow the authorities. You know, Darn?
Yeah, sorry. No, I just wanted to know in terms of vaccination, this might also be, is that pushed in Sweden? And if you have a different opinion or say it's maybe not like studied enough, the side effects or so, are you then also pushed out of the discussion?
Yes. It's really pushed that we should vaccinate. Uh-huh. And then they say at the same time, if you're not vaccinated, you can't be infected and spread the virus. If you are vaccinated, you can't be infected and spread the virus. My conclusion is, if an action does not change the outcome, do not proceed with the action.
Absolutely. It's a matter of common sense. But that is very surprising.
That common sense is not existing any longer.
But how do you explain, Björn, that you didn't have a real lockdown, and the pictures that we've been seeing from Sweden were of people who were mostly doing what they always did. They were walking around, sitting in cafes, talking to each other without wearing any masks. How come that these pictures are out there in the open, and still, the official narrative tries to push the populations to accept vaccines? How do you reconcile this?
Well, the problem is that to start with, masks. The authorities didn't believe in masks, so they stopped using it. And also, Folkhälsomyndigheten, the authority, they were, were in control. Mm-hmm. Then in May, June, somewhere, the Prime Minister took control and added some political decisions into it. So they had press conferences the same time in the government as Folkhälsomyndigheten at different places. So I think it was pretty good to start with. We should stay at home. But later that showed that you increased the rate of infection if you stay home. That's where you mostly get infected. And people should work at home as much as possible. And I think the hospitals really had a tough job, especially if they were working in all those personal protective stuff. And in the beginning, there wasn't enough masks anyway, so they just did as much as they could, but their personal protection equipment wasn't available. And also on those elderly homes, they didn't have enough protection equipment either. But still, if you look at Östergötland again, there are 235 äldreboende nursery homes, or whatever you would call it. And there were just 37 of those that had any death, between 1 and 8 deaths per home, which I think is pretty good. And that means that 198 of those 235 homes for elderly succeeded in keeping the COVID-19 out of their place, which I think is really good. But that is never pointed to. So I think it's really good that they really did do a good job.
How did they do it? Did they do it just by those regular common sense means, by washing your hands and keeping a physical distance?
That is what I think they did. There hasn't been a study about why.
How do the people, I mean, there's two sides to this story, and it seems like it's the same all over the world. There is the official narrative, and then there's something that's going on behind the scenes. Now, if I talk when I'm on a train or in a hotel, if I talk, or in a taxi cab, when I talk to people, they always have a completely different opinion of what's going on. They're not going to say it out loud, but when we talk in private, they do. Is that the same in Sweden? Do people look at what's going on, the official narrative, but don't really believe in it, or do they believe in it?
It's both ways. Mm-hmm. There are quite a lot of people believing in the official narrative, mm-hmm. but there are also a lot of people that you still can shake hands with. Mm-hmm. You still can hug. Mm-hmm. But that's really dangerous. Still, can the virus penetrate the skin? No. It's too tough. The only way the virus can get in is via mucous membranes. That means mouth, nose, eyes. There is no other way to get in.
Do people understand this, or?
No. Usually they don't. Mm. And all the politicians are increasing all the things you should not do, instead of just wash your hands before you suck your thumb.
What about, Björn, what about Anders Tegnell? Because he's someone who we here in Germany and in the rest of the world perceive as someone who is level-headed, who really knows what he's talking about, and most importantly, he seems to have taken the stand that we won't get fooled again, you know, just like in the old song of the real WHO, the WHO, yeah. Because he got fooled during the swine flu. How is his position? How do people see him in Sweden?
They see him as someone that tries to do the best thing. But also he is not in total charge. And also he has had, in the beginning at least, some good co-workers. Johan Giesecke, for example, who has been the head of
he was his predecessor, right?
EDC. Mm-hmm. Pardon?
He was his predecessor, wasn't he?
Sorry, I can't hear.
I thought,
yes.
Yeah, he was Anders Tegnell's predecessor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what happened?
Well, I think they cooperated pretty well at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Now I think Anders Tegnell got more restraints. Mm-hmm.
So that means there is again, there's two sides of this story. There, you have Anders Tegnell, who is in most of the rest of Europe's view, and in the view of the United States, for example, the people there who were watching the situation. He seems like a real hero because he was just standing there, talking to the people very quietly, not causing any panic, but keeping things in a commonsensical way on track. But then, all of a sudden, it seems as though there was a lot of pressure exerted on Swedish politicians, and that then plays a role in how independent Anders Tegnell can be, right?
Yeah. And the problem is, according to the Swedish constitution, all the authorities are definitely cannot be steered in any way from the government. But still, the government, and we have no thing like minister steering. So a minister of the that's the head of the authority is not allowed to go out and tell what the authority should do. But we have something else. We have something that's called regleringsbrev, regulation letter from the government that's going out to each of the authorities each year and telling them what to do. So I think minister steering is not good, but government steering is even worse.
That is extremely...
So they are not as independent as they should be.
Yeah, but in theory they are, because the government shouldn't interfere with the authorities. They're independent. Anders Tegnell should be independent, but in practice he is not, because they're trying to exert pressure on him.
Yeah.
What do you think, Björn? In my view, from what we've learned through the hearings in our Corona committee, it looks as though this is a political thing that's going on. It has nothing to do with health. That is my view, my personal view. There is a lot of pressure exerted on this country, just like in your country and in most other countries, by politicians who do not seem to be carrying out the people's wishes and who do not seem to have in mind the welfare of the people, but someone else's ideas. Could it be possible that through the WHO, through the World Economic Forum, a lot of pressure is being exerted on our politicians? Maybe a lot of money is being lavished on them so that they then steer us in a direction that the WHO and the World Economic Forum wants us to go. In other words, that the pharmaceutical industry and the tech industry wants us to go. Is that a possibility?
Definitely, according to my opinion.
And this is being done by either pressuring politicians or by paying them off?
Well, it's supposed to, Sweden is supposed to be one of the least corrupt countries, according to what they measure everything everywhere. But there is one problem. They are just measuring the private sector. They're not measuring the sun is coming around here now.
Now you're getting your vitamin D dose.
No, it's too low still. And there's a window in between as well. No, but the corruption of the public sector is never mentioned, never measured. And as far as I see it, the corruption level of the public sector is a really big problem in Sweden.
Is there any evidence for this? I mean, we do have some evidence here, but only very little. For example, our Secretary of Health, who knows nothing about health, he's a banker. He very recently purchased a home here in Berlin for more than 4 million euros, which is quite a steep price for even for a Secretary of Health who does make a little bit of money. So that is an indication of the fact that maybe money does play a role in this. Is there anything like that in Sweden? Can you see that, or how some politicians all of a sudden appear to be living a lavish lifestyle, or is that not visible?
Well, the problem is that our former Prime Minister, when he left his post, he just bought a country estate for 12 million kronor, which is 1,200 euros. He might be doing it, but and also.
For how much was that again, Björn? How much?
1.2 million euro.
Okay.
And those guys are often get a new job immediately after leaving their political scene. Go to what's called.
They take a job with a large corporation.
Some corporation.
Okay.
So they get very well paid off. And also one of the secretaries to the social minister went straight from I think it was was more Merck Sharp and Down, and got a really high position in the government.
Okay, let me translate that to.
I don't think that should be possible for a person to go from a medical company of some kind to the social department in the government.
I mean, that's the problem of the revolving door that we also seen, like in the US with the people working for the FDA and then all of a sudden for...
But the good thing, Björn, is that this is now all coming out into the open. It's becoming visible for a lot of people, not just for very few investigative reporters, but it's becoming obvious for quite a few people. Let me quickly translate. Also Anders Tegnell ist ja der große Held hier immer gewesen, seit er mit ruhiger Stimme seine Mitbürger versucht hat, auf einen vernünftigen Weg zu bringen in dieser Krise. Man konnte förmlich sehen, wie rund um ihn herum, auch im Rest der Welt, die Panik wie Wogen über ihn hereinbrachen. Er blieb da immer stehen wie ein Fels. Deswegen habe ich gefragt, wie wird er denn in Schweden wahrgenommen? Und er wird in Schweden von der Bevölkerung auch so wahrgenommen, dass er versucht, sein Bestes zu tun für die Bevölkerung, dass aber seine Position offenbar nicht mehr so stark ist, wie sie war. Er hatte sehr gute Mitarbeiter, unter anderem sein Vorgänger Johann Giesecke waren da, die ihm geholfen haben. Aber inzwischen ist der Druck aus der Regierung immer größer geworden. Zwar kann formal nach der Verfassung in Schweden die Regierung nicht in die einzelnen Behörden hineinregieren, sondern die sind unabhängig, aber über sogenannte Regulation Letters können sie es eben doch oder versuchen sie jedenfalls Druck auszuüben. Dann habe ich gefragt, woher kommt denn der Druck, der da ausgeübt wird? Die Politiker, die sich bis dahin ja nicht so weit aus dem Fenster gelehnt hatten, laufen hier plötzlich amok, so wie bei uns eigentlich schon seit langem. und versuchen, die Panik immer wieder hochkochen zu lassen. Die Vermutung, die ich gefragt habe, ist, kann das sein, dass die Politiker eben sich nicht mehr um das Wohl der Bevölkerung kümmern, sondern dass die Politiker inzwischen die Interessen der Industrie, insbesondere der pharmazeutischen und der Tech-Industrie durchsetzen? Er sagte, ja, das befürchtet er auch, dass es so ist. Da wird entweder Druck auf die Politiker ausgeübt oder aber es geht um Korruption. Zwar gilt Schweden als dasjenige Land, was die wenigste Korruption hat, aber darauf hat Björn Hammarskjöld gerade hingewiesen, der Korruptionsmesser betrifft nur den privaten Sektor. Die Behörden bzw. die Regierung, der Public Sector wird davon nicht erfasst. Aber da gibt es sowas offenbar, zumindest gibt es Hinweise darauf, denn einer der letzten Premierminister hat sich für die nicht ganz geringe Summe von 1,2 Millionen Euro einen Landsitz gekauft. Häufig sei es so, dass Mitglieder der Regierung, wenn sie ausscheiden aus der Regierung, herausragend gut bezahlte Jobs in der Industrie bekommen oder umgedreht, dass jemand aus einem pharmazeutischen Unternehmen plötzlich in der Regierung einen hohen Posten kriegt. Und auf der Ebene scheint sich so etwas wie Korruption abzuspielen. As I said, Björn, I think that's one of the few good things that's coming out of this, that all of these, well, I should say criminal activities, that's really what we're talking about, that all of these criminal activities, which have been going on for a long time under the radar, are now becoming visible. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, we spoke to a former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the United States. Her name is Catherine Austin Fitz. You may have heard of her. And she explained to us how during her time in government, but also during her time as a investment banker, she realized that there are two levels of economics. One is the overt financial sector, for example, which everybody can see. And then there's a level below this. Both levels are being run by the same people, but there's a level below this, and that's a level that deals with criminal economic activities. Now, I think we could have seen this a long time ago, and we should have seen this a long time ago, but we didn't want to. Now we're being forced to take note of this, and I think that's the one really good thing. I think that is going to be extremely helpful in stopping this and then taking or holding all the people who are responsible for this actually responsible in courts of law.
Yeah. One thing more I would like to talk about is how much of the mRNA is delivered to the patient. Because I've been working with measles virus RNA, and RNA is a really tricky molecule. It sticks to anything. Mm-hmm. So I just read what's in the jab, and that is 1 millimole of sodium per dose, mm-hmm. which means 12 milligrams, and it's 23 milligrams, and it's 39 milligrams of potassium. But that's per 0.3 milliliters. If you multiply it by as should be done, it gives you 438 grams of salts in 1 liter of the vaccine. That's 44% salt solution you inject. Mm-hmm. And that's for just one reason. Otherwise, the RNA would fold like hairpins and fold and attach to each other, to itself. Mm-hmm. That's a RNA, single-stranded RNA or nucleic nucleic acids, they always try to get together in double-stranded form. So this means you get a loop like that, and then it attaches itself, a loop out there and going out. So it just, if you don't have enough salt. And then they say it's essentially salt-free. So 48%, 44% solution is salt-free. It's just marvelous. And then it contains PEG, polyethylene glycol. And why do you need that one? Because otherwise the RNA would attach to the vial, walls of the vial. And then you look at the syringe. The walls of the syringe, there the RNA attaches as well. If you don't have enough PEG, there will just be a salt solution left, no mRNA at all, and it's just 30 milligrams of RNA. So I just wonder, has anyone measured how much RNA is getting out of the syringe and into the patient?
Well, some people are looking at this. I know that, because some people have gotten hold of vials with the vaccine, and they're trying to find out what's really happening.
Yeah. And then, what's more, so there are, as far as I can calculate, it's about 1.5 times 1.5 times 10 to the minus 14 is the number of molecules, which means that you get about 1/10 of an RNA molecule per cell in an adult. That's not very much. So then how do you fix the vaccine? They add phospholipids, and they add cholesterol, and then they add ultrasound to mix it together to get those small particles. The very same way that you can make liposomal vitamin C. That's the very same method. And what happens to the RNA when you shake it that much with the ultrasound? Well, it says in the document that they are having less messenger RNA and more fragmented RNA than in the tests they did. So actually it is not the very same vaccine that is tested by the pharmaceutical companies. It's less RNA, mRNA, and more of RNA fragments. So, and also RNA is really, really, really fragile. And we have lots and lots and lots of enzymes breaking down RNases. Because RNA should not be free in the body. It should be just be within cells. And the messenger RNA is normally produced in the nucleus and is transported out through a nuclear membrane into the cytoplasm, where it should find a ribosome which can translate the RNA code to protein. So first question is how to get the RNA inside the cell and how to get the RNA free from those phospholipids. So the RNA can really reach a ribosome and start working. I think there are many, many, many questions there.
Björn, we will talk about this probably a lot more because our colleague Dr. Renate Holzeisen from Italy has just filed or is about to file a nullification complaint against the EU Commission for admitting the vaccines. And we have heard some of the wildest stories from experts about this messenger RNA. There are new points that you're pointing out right now. I think we're going to have to go deeper into this, and I think the discussion is just about to start right now because more and more people, unlike what is being reported in the mainstream media, more and more people do not want to cross this red line of getting vaccinated. But Björn, I think we're going to have, unless there's something that we forgot to talk about that's really important, I think we're going to have to switch over to Italy because we have Dr. Angelo Giorgiani, who is going to join us with the help of our translator, Dr. Renate Holzeisen, who's a high-ranking judge from Italy, and he will tell us a little bit about what's going on in Italy. And I think that's that will in fact confirm some of the suspicions that you and I have been talking about today, about the criminal activities that are going on in the background.
Yeah.
Okay, let me briefly translate what you just said. Also, Björn fragt sich, Professor Hammarskjöld fragt sich, wie viel von dieser mRNA kommt denn überhaupt in den Körper? Wie viel kommt da dann an in den Zellen, wo ja dann sozusagen der Generator losgehen soll und die Immunabwehr praktisch ersetzen soll? Er sagt, er geht davon aus, dass wahrscheinlich nur 1/10 von der RNA überhaupt ankommt, und er geht davon aus, nachdem er sich angeguckt hat, wie fragil die RNA überhaupt ist, dass diese Messenger-RNA nur zu einem kleinen Teil überhaupt ankommt. Da sind die Lipide, die noch benutzt werden, da ist Cholesterol, was benutzt wird, dann muss das Ganze kompliziert zusammengemischt werden mit Ultraschall. Das Ganze ist so fragil, dass er sich fragt, was bringt das überhaupt? Was kommt da überhaupt an? Dem werden wir nachgehen müssen. Es ist gut, dass das angesprochen worden ist. Ich bin selbst nicht ansatzweise fachkundig, aber wir werden dem nachgehen. Und ich glaube, die Kollegin Holzeisen hat jetzt auch zugehört. Das könnten Dinge sein, die im Weiteren noch eine Rolle spielen. Björn, unless there's something important that still needs to be mentioned, I would like to switch over. But I would also very much like to thank you. This is an honor and a pleasure to talk to you, to someone who can tell us about what's really going on in Sweden and how much pressure obviously is being exerted and how difficult it is for someone like Anders Tegnell to still stand tall.
Right. Thank you very much for letting me talk here. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. We'll be in touch. Have a great weekend, Björn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.